Hello and welcome to another episode of the Hockey News Cheat Sheet brought to you by Stix.com. That's Stix.com. I'm George Nassios and I'm joined by our co-host Andrew McInnis, who's very excited about Jake Evans re-signing in Montreal, but that's a topic for another day. We're going to start with one of the Montreal Canadiens' biggest rivals, Andrew, the Boston Bruins. Some big news this week. Injury to Brad Marchand. Looks like he's going to be out for a bit. Trent Frederic traded. Their odds to make the playoffs have now dropped to plus 700, Andrew. In a crowded Eastern Conference playoff race, they're still only 2 points back of the second wildcard spot. Is there any chance the Bruins can squeak into the playoffs?
George, I think those odds are what they are for a good reason. I think that we finally have seen kind of I don't want to say change of the guard, but we've seen things a little bit changed in the Eastern Conference a little bit here. And obviously we see with the Atlantic Division, with it being the Leafs, Panthers, Lightning, and then, of course, the wild card race would be where the Bruins would belong. And there's too many other teams right next to them competing. And I can't believe I'm saying this because the Bruins, although they had that perfection line for so many years, they did have depth, right? They did have that second line, and they had some kind of like the rough and tough guys on the third and fourth line for many years. They just haven't had that this year. They've got too many guys making a bunch of money that shouldn't be making that, and a lot of guys that aren't contributing. You mentioned the injuries. To me, that it's just not there. But I think back to like 3 or 4 weeks ago, you and I talking, and I mentioned on the show the Bruins were only minus 130 to make the playoffs. So, I mean, it's unbelievable how all of a sudden, if you wanted them to miss the playoffs, it was a few weeks ago to bet that. But now, yeah, sure, that price does look intriguing, but I'm not buying it because, the Rangers have been one of the bookmakers' favorite teams to make that wild card spot. They're officially in as of today, our recording day. And, the Blue Jackets, what a story they've been. Then, of course, you've got the Ottawa Senators, the Canadiens, all these other teams fighting for it. Sure, the value is good there, but I think this Bruins team is out of the picture, and they're out of it for good this year.
Yeah, the question was, is there a chance? Of course there's a chance. You
Right.
still got David Pastrnak. You have Jeremy Swayman, who maybe wasn't what he was last year, but can definitely steal some games. But I think you're exactly right when you say the odds are what they are. They deserve to be at plus 700. They're a really long shot right now. And we're talking about Marchand and Trent Frederic. Look, the biggest issue this Bruins team has right now is Charlie McAvoy and Hampus Lindholm are out of their lineup. Those are the top two defensemen. And Charlie McAvoy is one of the best defensemen in the game, arguably top 10, definitely top 15. So you're taking him and Hampus Lindholm out of the lineup. That's perhaps why Swayman isn't what he was last year. McAvoy's been in the lineup for most of the year, but Lindholm was missed most of the year. So you take away your top two defensemen, you take away one of your best wingers of Brad Marchand. You're having down years compared to last year from Charlie Coyle, and Pavel Zacha's kind of come back a bit. But Pasternak's an absolute stud, but you can only do so much. So when you're losing that many players, and like you said, the depth isn't what it used to be in Boston. It's a big hill to climb, and I just don't think they have the horses to do it. Is there a chance? Yes, but plus 700. They deserve to be at plus 700 given the situation they're in right now. We're going to switch pages here. Back to your Montreal Canadiens. Not necessarily about Jake Evans here, but we'll mention them. They've been one of the hottest teams in the NHL since returning from the Four Nations. They were brutal before the Four Nations. Looked like they played themselves out of the playoff race. But right now they're right back in it. They've rattled off 5 straight wins, and they pulled themselves to within 1 point of a playoff spot. We mentioned the Jake Evans extension, which was going to be like one of their major trade chips possibly going into the deadline. So could they be riding out with this roster here, not really trading anything? They're at plus 630 to make the playoffs. What has been the biggest change leading to this recent run of success, and is it worthwhile to bet on them at these odds?
George, as a fan, I watch as many press conferences as I can. I think back to the charity golf tournament at the start of the year, the team building stuff they do, and all the president of hockey ops, the general manager, coach, everybody used this expression, in the mix. That's what the Montreal Canadiens wanted to be, was in the mix. And so that's where they are right now. So one could argue the goal has been achieved. Of course, don't tell the players that their goal hasn't been achieved. They want to get to that next spot, of course, with the postseason. But one thing that all good teams can do is, they can get out of a rut very fast. And to the point you mentioned about before the Four Nations, the problem with this Habs team, although there's a lot of problems, biggest problem has been they've been too much of a going in waves, right? They'll win 7 of their last 8, and then they'll lose 6 of their last 7. The thing is, good teams don't lose more than 2 in a row. Good teams don't lose. You don't see the elite of the elite doing that. But right now, I just think this team, they look rested after the Four Nations. They're getting production. I always talk about depth, and of course, we just talked about it with the Bruins. But when it ultimately comes down to it, Suzuki has 13 points in 5 games since the Four Nations break, leading the NHL, or he's up there with Rupe Hintz. The big guys are being the big guys. Suzuki's playing well. Caulfield's playing well. Slafkovsky, I don't know what he did over the Four Nations break, but he is looking like the player that the Habs fans want him to be for the entire season. And of course, Lane Hudson continues to do what he's doing. Look, I've made it very clear here on the Hockey News cheat sheet, I'm a fan. So a lot of my opinions, we'll try not to be biased here. So I'm going to throw it back to you with this, George. Based on where they are right now, Rangers, Senators, Canadiens, and some of the teams around them, we just discussed the Boston Bruins, I do think that price is relatively fair. And the reason why I'm going to say that is because looking at the where they were supposed to be at the start of the season, and where the number was, let's say 5 or 6 weeks ago, it's about the exact same as what it is right now. But for the Boston Bruins we just discussed, their number was minus 130 a handful of weeks ago, and now it's plummeted. So the odds makers told us, they've completely lost faith, whereas the line for the Montreal is around the same as it was. Here's my problem. They're playing the Avalanche, the Oilers, the Flames, the Canucks, the Panthers, the Hurricanes. The schedule gets really tough. So is it worth a sprinkle? Sure. Things are going well for them right now, but I wouldn't be shocked to see the Senators and the Rangers be those two teams, and maybe the Columbus Blue Jackets can hang on to their spot, but the odds are pretty good. Well, what are your thoughts overall, George? I know I'm the Habs fan of the two of us, but at that price, I just don't think this team can hang on. 5 straight wins. We're going to have to see some regression come soon enough.
Yeah, I would say I would expect the odds to be a bit lower. So like in terms of, I think those are pretty good odds right now at plus 630. If you're going to bet on them, like that's a pretty good bet. I would have expected them maybe around plus 450, plus 400, given what they've done. But you're exactly right that when you say they play great in waves and they lose games in waves, there was a run around Christmas to around late January where they won like 10 of 13 games or something. Then they lost about 6 in a row. So they're on a heater right now. I think they're going to come back down to reality somewhat. I don't think the Habs are making the playoffs. I think the price is pretty good though. Those betting odds at plus 630 are pretty good right now. So if you're one person that thinks, hey, they're definitely in the mix, I could see them doing it. I just think the Senators and the Red Wings are definitely like more in that mix, and the Blue Jackets have a spot. And you mentioned the Rangers, who seem to be playing better now. I don't really understand some of the moves the Rangers have made. I'm not talking about JT Miller. I think that was a good one, but some of the other moves they've made, who knows if that means they're going to be doing something else. But I just look at all those teams bunched up there right now, and I don't see Montreal making it out of them. But at plus 630, I would say those odds are a pretty fair bet. So, I mean, we're going to see the trade deadlines in a few days here. We might see some major shifts in a few days, but for what it is now, I think those are pretty good odds. I just don't see the Habs making the playoffs. But at those odds, it might be worth a sprinkle. We're going to move on to a team that kind of jumped the deadline, made a pretty big move. The defending Stanley Cup champs with a pretty big move, acquiring Seth Jones from Chicago over the weekend. They're now minus 115 favorites over the Leafs, who are plus 155 to win the Atlantic Division. The Leafs are in first based on they have a game in hand. I believe they're tied in points right now. Even with Matthew Tkachuk out, and it seems like he's going to be out until the playoffs start, a little Nikita Kucherov business or Vegas Golden Knights business going on there in Florida. Even with them out, could Jones help them secure the division?
Look, I can't believe that every couple of weeks here, and we discuss this, I have to say good things about the Maple Leafs because it just pains me inside to do it every time. But look, when Austin Matthews is looking like a shell of himself, and some of these guys aren't really playing their best hockey and they're picking up wins, it only means one thing. It means guys like Bobby McMatthews are playing very well. Okay, McMahon is the new Matthews right now, and some of these guys are creating plays. And when I look at the bottom six for the Maple Leafs, sure, it's one thing they want to kind of shore up a little bit at the trade deadline, maybe pick up a defenseman as well, but I'm a little more confident in the Maple Leafs just because, and I do like that acquisition from getting Seth Jones, although I really don't like that it's turning into the NBA where a player can just talk smack about their team and get traded to the defending Stanley Cup champions. I don't really like that very much, but the fact of the matter is I see this all the time. The defending Stanley Cup champions, they don't need to win the division next year. They just need to get in. They need to get to the dance and then make some noise once they get there. It's not about the seed. Once you've proven that you've won the big game, once you've proven you've lifted the Stanley Cup over your head, it's just about getting there. So you mentioned the LTIR stuff. That's tough to see, but Tkachuk obviously clearly is hurt. They're going to probably make some more moves at the deadline, but I still believe in this Maple Leafs team. They're winning all the good games. They just continue to lose against teams like the San Jose Sharks, of course. But if they can keep beating the elite teams, then I'm still confident in this Maple Leafs team. I think it'll be huge for their confidence, huge for the home ice advantage, and will help them out in a very big way. Also, getting that wild card team in the first round will certainly do them a lot of favors. I think Seth Jones will be good for them. One thing about Seth Jones I'll add is that he's going to go from playing 24, 25 minutes a night to playing 19 to 21. Which can be really nice for a player like that because he has so much capability offensively and in his own end defensively, of course. But when you're playing on a bad team, assistant captain for the Blackhawks, and you had to play 24 minutes, that was no wonder he was upset to the media, though, George. You had to play 24 minutes for that team a night. I mean, that'd make me upset too.
Yeah, it obviously wore on him. So you like the Leafs at the plus money still. I do somewhat agree with you with that. The only thing I'd say is, and Tampa's been on a crazy run, but it looks like it'll be the Leafs or the Panthers, even though the Lightning have even moved into that conversation. If you're the Leafs or the Panthers, you're going to have a much tougher time, I'd expect, with Tampa in round one than you would with a Detroit or Ottawa or even a Montreal or those teams we were talking about. So that might wear on you as the playoffs go along, and who knows what Tampa might do at the deadline as well. So that's one thing to watch out for. I mean, I think both teams definitely want the number one seed, but maybe the Leafs want to push for it a little more. Plus 155 plus money, you're still taking the Leafs. And we'll see what happens at the deadline. The Leafs have got some reinforcements. Cale Yarncroc just came back for his first game against San Jose the other night. Pacioretty's still out, so it's going to be really interesting to see what these teams do. But as the odds still stand, you're taking the Leafs at plus 155. I'll ride with you there. I'll keep that bet with you there and stay away from Florida. We're going to move away to two top teams in another division. The Vegas Golden Knights won 5 of their last 6 and hold a 4-point lead in the Pacific over the Oilers and are minus 170 favorites to win the Pacific Division. While the Golden Knights have historically been known to make blockbuster deals at the deadline, they might not have the assets or cap space to do it this season. Unlike the Oilers or the Kings, plus 165 for the Oilers, plus 1,000 for the Kings to win the Pacific. It's likely that these odds will shift once the deadline passes. But who would you bet on to win the division at these current odds?
I think, George, I have to look towards the Oilers just because I think it's kind of a buy low situation here. I mean, it just hasn't been pretty. Obviously, they lose 6-2 to the Anaheim Ducks. They lose to the Panthers. They lose to the Lightning. They
Connor
lose.
McDavid is a minus 9 since returning from the Four Nations. And he's got 6 points in 6 games, I think, but he does not look like himself.
No, he doesn't. But at the end of the day, I feel like this would be the time to look at it now, right? I mean, do you want to take a future on a team when they've won 7 in a row? I see a lot of people do that in all sports, and it really makes me scratch my head. Like in every single sport, it's like people wait until this team is on the biggest run they're going to go on all season long. And they're like, all right, I'm sold. I'm convinced.
Yeah,
it's time to bet a future on this team. Well, you're getting the absolute worst price you possibly can when you do that. And I think that when this team has won, I think it's 1 and 4 last 5 out of the break.
Yeah,
I'm buying on them. And I think the point that you made and the point in the question for the topic of this segment is going to be about assets, going to be about the trade deadline, and going to be about what they've done. I'm not really sure about the health and status of Trent Frederic, but man, I really do like that fit for them, a player like that. And I do think they'll be a little more aggressive. And as much as Stuart Skinner was good in the playoffs last year, I'll give him all the credit. He is not the reason they didn't win the Stanley Cup. They got to get another goalie as well to have another 1-2 punch option. This Oilers team, I think,
Wow,
will
you
make
think
some
so,
noise.
huh?
They're going to make some noise. I think they're going to make some noise. And just the way the question was set up, very well said and good topic by looking at Vegas, because Vegas was always that blockbuster team. I don't think Vegas is that blockbuster team this year. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I'm not sure Vegas needs to be honest. I'm going to disagree with you on this one. Although the odds are better if you bet on the Oilers, they're better for a reason.
Yep.
Vegas is 4 points up with a game in hand, a quarter of the season left. Can the Oilers rattle off 10 in a row? Yeah, they definitely can. But at the same time, I don't think the Vegas is going to fall apart down the stretch. They got a big game with the Leafs coming up, but they have some easy teams on their schedule coming up as well. I think they got a couple dates with Pittsburgh in their next 4 or 5, and God loves Sidney Crosby. Pittsburgh is just not a good team, so those should be 4 banked points. We'll see when Theodore comes back, but I think they have enough horses over there in Vegas that I'm going to go with the team that's up 4 points with a game in hand right now with a quarter season left. And I think Vegas is the team to keep the bet on to win the Pacific Division. So it'll be exciting to see how it plays out. We've seen the Oilers go on crazy runs before, 10 games or even more. Didn't they have like a almost record winning streak last year of 15, 16 games? So it'll be something to watch, but I'm going to stick with Vegas for the time being, even though they are the favorites. We move to another Great Western Conference team, the Dallas Stars. Put together the best record in the NHL since the new year, 17-6-1. They currently have the second best odds at plus 440 behind the Oilers, who are plus 270 to win the Western Conference final this season. Is there anything holding this Stars team back from getting over the hump this season? And should the Oilers still be favored over them?
You know, I just think from what I've seen, I've actually been watching a lot of Dallas Stars games lately, and I just think that I finally am seeing them pull it all together. As you mentioned, that record 17-6-1. Looking at the Western Conference odds, looking at the Stanley Cup odds, we've seen it happen so many times where a team has just had to go through it time and time and time again
Yeah.
before they can actually win. I think that if anybody doesn't have the Dallas Stars in their betting futures portfolio, whether it be Western Conference, whether it be Stanley Cup, now is the time, because if you're waiting until, let's say, the beginning of April, George, the odds are going to be too bad. You might as well just kind of roll over the series price, usually what we tell people to do. So if you want to jump in on Dallas, now is the time to do it. Yeah, sure, we're talking about a favorite, but I think just the way that they play, when I watch them, their zone exits are very impressive. And I learned a lot about a guy like Thomas Harley, getting to watch him for a few games at the Four Nations. Their
He was
defensemen
really
are
good.
good. They've got depth. And one thing about them right now as well, knock on wood here on my desk, they're relatively healthy, which is a big concern and big thing that's happened lately for the
Well,
Dallas Stars. So they haven't
save
been
for
as
Heiskanen
banged
and
up.
Sagan. They actually have a couple big names out. They have their number one defenseman out, and Sagan, who has been out for a while, but he was off to a great start this year.
I guess the depth pieces, like those are the big names they could, of course, use. But down the lineup, we're seeing a lot of production. I saw Wyatt Johnston just kind of declined an offer from the Dallas Stars for a contract extension. So who knows? This could be kind of a last hoorah for some of these guys, because there's a lot of guys, young talent, older talent on this Dallas Stars team, the way they're built. Even though I said that about the Oilers and I like the value on them, I feel like this Dallas Stars, it might be their year, George. And I know it's not really a bold take I'm making by any means, but just there hasn't really been much noise made about them all year. But I just feel like it's their time.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're fine picking the Oilers on the other ones because that's where we were talking about the Pacific Division and taking the Stars here. And I would
Yeah.
agree with you on the Stars. And when you talk about the injuries, maybe one of the reasons you said they're not really is because they are so deep and you don't realize the injuries they have.
Mm.
This is the deepest team in the league, in my opinion. and they picked up Mikael Granlund and Cody Ceci from San Jose a few weeks ago. I mean, they have guys on the if they're completely healthy, they'll have a fourth line that will have players that'll play on a lot of teams' second lines once they're completely healthy. And if Sagan and Heiskanen stay out till the playoffs, they still have room to make another deal. This team is scary good. And I think maybe some people might not think they have that stud at center, but I think Rupe Hintz is a horse. Obviously, he's not a Connor McDavid or Nathan McKinnon. But then you got Matt Duchene at number 2. You got Wyatt Johnson, who you just spoke about at number 3 center, who's been red hot. And the wingers, they don't need tough guys at wingers because they have tough guys that score. Guys like Jamie Benn and Mason Marchment. And they'll need Heiskanen back for sure and playing at his top level. He's to me, another top 10 defenseman for sure. And they'll need him back regardless of who they get on defense, but I'm pretty sure he'll be back. I love the Stars at these odds. I think they're not only the best team in the West, I think they're the best team in the league right now. We'll see what happens at the deadline, but I love them at these odds, and they'd be my choice to come out of the Western Conference as things stand.
And Jake Ottinger as well, right? I mean, people would talk
not
about
to mention one of the best goalies in the league. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Hellebuck needed that big game, and he did have a big game in the Four Nations final. Obviously, the way that got finished, Binnington ended up being the bigger gamer in that one. But let's be honest, two great American goalies, Hellebuck and Ottinger, they're both itching to have those big playoff performances. Ottinger was in the Western Conference Finals last year. Let's not forget that. But need to get all the way, need to go all the way to the Cup Finals. Big season, I think, big playoff push here. For Jake Ottinger coming.
And another team to watch for, not to go on a tangent because we got to get to our next topic, check the Winnipeg Jets odds. I think nobody respects the Winnipeg Jets. I think they're going to make a move at the deadline, and they've been the best team in the league all year. They have everything going for them right now, and I think they will make a move. So don't sleep on the Winnipeg Jets either. I don't think a lot of people have them in their top 4 to come out of the West, as crazy as this seems. I don't think we're going to see a repeat of what happened to them in the first round against Colorado last year. But we're going to move to a very interesting stat here and question. Since February 1st, Andrew, no player in the NHL has recorded more points than, wait for it, Ryan Donato of the Chicago Blackhawks. 7 goals, 16 points in 10 games during that span. With the possibility of him being traded to a stronger team this week, could Donato be a solid fantasy target for owners looking for secondary scoring?
He 100% could be. The only issue is, and this is from actually, I was listening to a few podcasts about this last night. The only issue is, George, the asking price is going to be a hell of a lot. Because if you're Kyle Davidson in Chicago, you got to think to yourself, man, I better get something for this guy. If I'm getting rid of him, I better get something. And you better play your cards right, because you don't want to watch this guy go to a different team, go to a Stanley Cup contender, and have success, and you barely even gave up a second, third round pick for him. That's the problem, is that
if anybody could screw up a trade in the NHL, it's any GM named Kyle. Sorry, go on.
Definitely. So yeah, to answer your question, he's been phenomenal. And some people would argue, yes, he's playing on Chicago, which means it's more free-flowing hockey. It's more open hockey, which means there's more opportunity to score because the defense just hasn't been there in the first place again. But at the same time, when there's not that many offensive weapons, when you don't have much depth, there's a lot of pressure on you. You're facing the best defenseman every night. He has been a very big sleeper as far as fantasy hockey is concerned. It obviously depends on where he lands. And the big thing I will say, George, is that I just don't know how much they're going to want to get in return for a Ryan Donato trade. That's the big difference. Are teams going to be willing to give up a first-round pick for Ryan Donato? I don't think so, right? Because you know what he is? He's a rental. An expiring contract means a rental. So how much are you willing to give up for that? And that's the thing, is that how much would you be willing to give up for a player to only be yours for the next 3 months? That's the issue. But fantasy-wise, I would definitely add him to my roster.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting what you're saying, but a good add to the roster. And for people saying what you just mentioned, that he's playing on a team in Chicago that's playing free flowing, they don't really care, and he's racking up these points. Connor Bedard doesn't have a single point since the Four Nations, since teams have come back for the Four Nations. So it's not like everybody on Chicago's tearing it up, but he is. So just something to know.
Good point.
Okay, sticking with the fantasy game, which recently traded forward would you rather have for the rest of your fantasy hockey season? Trent Frederic, who the Oilers just acquired, or Mikael Granlund, who we talked about with the Stars?
Well, I think the biggest thing I always mention when I talk about players that go to the Stars, and you talked about it, how you think they're the biggest depth, they have the most depth in the league. And I talk about it when I'm betting on props in the sports betting market, is that you kind of want a guy that's going to be able to contribute to the scoreboard more. And I get it. One of those teams has McDavid and Draisaitl, but one of those teams has 12 guys every night that would not shock me to score, would not shock me to get a point. So that's the trickiest part with the Dallas Stars. Now, I think that what we're going to see with the Edmonton Oilers is going to be really interesting to see once Frederic gets healthy, what is his time on ice going to look like? How much time are they going to give him? Because as we've seen from the Edmonton coaching staff, the way that they just absolutely skyrocket Draisaitl's time on the ice, McDavid's time on the ice, Hyman's time on the ice, when they're down one goal or when they're even up one goal late in the game, it's important that they use those guys in the moments they need them, but also trust their depth. I think Frederic will get some time out there. And as much as he has had some scraps in his career and been a physical guy, he's not a bad forward. He's kind of like that power forward that the Edmonton Oilers needed. So my biggest question mark is how much time he'll get, especially, in those offensive situations. But I would probably still say Frederic, just because I think that there's so much of a spread out offense in Dallas that, and if some people might say, well, wouldn't that be a good thing? And I think that the problem is that he could go, Dallas could win 4 of their last 5 games and Grenlund could have 1 point.
Be
If you
invisible,
told
yeah.
me that the Oilers scored, 4 or 5 goals in a couple games in a row, I would tell you Frederic got involved in some of those goals. So interesting conversation, but I just think that there's too many mouths to feed in Dallas, whereas there aren't as many mouths to feed in Edmonton.
I think the only one thing you got to be cautious of, and I don't know if there's been an update, but Frederic's nursing an injury right now. Not sure when he's going to be back, so
Yeah.
that's something to watch out for. Sticking in the fantasy corner, who are your best ads for this week, Andrew?
Yeah, best ads. Look, I've kind of talked about this guy already before, but we're going to mention Matvei Michkov. I mean, some of these younger guys, whether I've mentioned, Shane Wright, or whether it's been some of the younger guys, or even talking up a guy like Lane Hudson on my Canadiens, some of these young guys, they just go in spurts, right? And that's the thing, George. We've seen Matvei Michkov go 8 or 9 games where he just disappears. And then all of a sudden he just brings up this scoring streak. He's got shootout winners. He's been a huge part of the power play once again. And Tortorella is kind of showing him more respect with that time on the ice again. So I will look towards Michkov. Again, correct me if I'm wrong on this one. Maybe this isn't much of a hot take, George, here, but I think that Val Nichushkin is someone that maybe people are still skeptical with because he got back from his injury, and then there was the time off he had, of course. But he's a huge part of this Colorado team. And I think if you look at him, you got to think, you know what? Even though there are mouths to feed on that team with Lehkonen, with Necas now, with McKinnon and Drouin, Nichushkin is a major part of this team. So if he's somehow available, I would pick him up.
100% if he's available, and I actually think he'd be more available than Michkov because he's been injured, and you mentioned he was out with the other issues.
Yeah.
So like I think a lot of people are kind of weary of him, but that's a guy I definitely snipe up, and he comes through big. I'm not sure how available Michkov would be. I think Nichushkin might even be more available in some fantasy leagues. Who are the guys you would tell people to think about dropping this week, Andrew?
This pains me inside because I don't like saying bad things about local players, and this player is from my hometown. Drake Batherson, second line right winger for the Ottawa Senators, just not producing as much lately. And I think this Ottawa Senators team has seen their scoring production drop off a little bit, which means they're relying on Linus Allmark. They're relying on low scoring games. And even when they scored 4 goals against the Washington Capitals, George, they lost 5-4. So I think the production we're seeing from Norris and Batherson and some of these guys on the Ottawa Senators starting to come to a halt a little bit. So I would say maybe take a look at picking somebody up in place of him. And I mentioned this last week. You and I had a little back and forth. So I'm going to mention this guy again because I still think that despite the trade speculations, He won't be lighting the score sheet up on whatever team he lands on.
Don't tell me Zibanejad.
Brock Nelson.
Okay.
I don't believe in that guy, man. I think that whatever team he goes on, he's going to be a bottom 6 guy, a shutdown guy, a face-off guy, D-zone guy. He's not going to a new team to put the puck in the net.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, it looks like he's on his way out. Had a pretty emotional post-game interview the other night. A night after, I believe he had a goal and an assist.
Yeah.
So, but you're saying drop that guy even if he gets traded. I think he will be on a new team come Friday. We'll see what happens. Excited for the trade deadline. Thanks for another great show, Andrew. This has been another episode of the Hockey News Cheat Sheet brought to you by Stix.com. That's STIX.com. Until next time.